You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast. For those that don't know your story, to give them some background from where you've come from, if you could give us the important highlights, the milestones that you experienced as a young child growing up in Detroit, and how you got caught up in the drug culture there, and then ultimately what happened that led to your deep transformation.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting and very relevant question. I think that, my backstory will help your audience really understand why I share my story and why I share some of the things that I share through my writing and through other media outlets. I grew up in the city of Detroit, my hometown, my beloved hometown. And, I grew up in a household that on the outside looking in would have been considered the model of working class America. My dad was in the Air Force Reserves. He also worked for the state of Michigan in mental health. And my mother was primarily a homemaker raising 6 children. And, so on the outside, we have a landscape yard. We had the brick home. We were actually the first Black family on our block of a very diverse block. On our neighbors to the right was, this Irish woman named Ms. Murray. And on the left, we had a Spanish family. And, we just had a really interesting mixture of people and very communal. And, despite the exterior, there were things going on in our household. My parents' relationship was fragmented. There was high levels of physical and emotional abuse. And when I was about 14, 13 and 14, I think I was 13, I just got to a breaking point and ran away from home. I was a honor roll scholarship kid and with dreams of being a doctor. And when I ran away from home, what I thought would happen was that, some other family would see the potential and embrace me and welcome me into the warmth that I think all children are deserving of. And unfortunately, during that time of being a transient homeless youth, I was seduced into the crack cocaine trade. This is when crack first began to penetrate the Midwest. And I got caught up in this culture that I was completely clueless about. Even now, when I reflect back on the last remnants of my childhood, it's always heartbreaking to me, to think that I was a kid in this very adult environment. And I experienced all the horrors that came with that environment. My childhood friend was murdered. I was beaten nearly to death. I was robbed at gunpoint. And I became addicted to crack cocaine at 14 years old. And this was all within the first 6 months of being in this horrific culture.
Jeez.
Despite those things, I remained in the culture. And when I was 17 years old, I got shot multiple times. After I was shot, I was rushed to the hospital by a friend of mine who had got shot the previous summer in an event that his friend was murdered. And, he drove me to the hospital because the ambulance never came. I got rushed into the hospital. They took 2 of the bullets out, left 1 bullet in, patched me up, and basically just sent me back to the neighborhood. Like I didn't meet with one psychologist, one psychiatrist, one therapist. I didn't have any clue of what PTSD was. And when I got back to my neighborhood, I was paranoid. I was angry. I was sad. I did not really understand how to process those emotions as a kid. And I found myself becoming really, really angry. And I was angry at being afraid. I was angry at, standing on the corner and seeing a car come past and feeling my body tense up because that's how I got shot. And I began to internalize all those experiences. And, in that moment, I just made a plan for myself to carry a gun, and that if I found myself in a similar situation, I would shoot first. And 16 months or so later, I got into a conflict about 2 a.m. The conflict arose after another shooting had occurred at a party I was DJing. And, I was on edge like everybody else in our group at the time when a person that I sold drugs to wanted to make a deal. I didn't want to make that deal. It escalated to a heated and intense argument. And as that argument escalated, another man, a man named David, joined into the conversation. We kind of went back and forth, and as it escalated, I pulled out a handgun and fired 4 shots that tragically caused David's death. And, it was one of the most horrific nights for David's family. And it was a horrific night for my family and myself as well. And, when I went to prison, I was sentenced to 17 and 40 years in prison for second degree murder, felony firearm. And when I went to prison, I was just a bitter, angry kid. I was so confused at how I could, cause this man's death. And, took me years to reconcile all those feelings. But that's where the journey really began to unfold in this way that led me to the path that I'm on today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.